Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to preface these few words by saying that since getting the encephalitis in 2016, I have made a very good recovery. And despite this, I was never allowed return to the job that I loved. And although there is still some residual brain fog from time to time, I try not to let encephalitis-related issues define who I am anymore. And I hope that my recovery will be of some support to anyone who is now on a similar journey to the one that my family and I found ourselves 5 years ago. When Sarah asked me to do this originally, I said, yeah, I'll do the couple of shots on the screen and I'll talk off the cuff. But I'm going to spare you that, because if I did that, we'd still be here until 7 o'clock this evening. So I'm going against all good teaching, and I'm just going to read from script what I have in front of me. And then I know that I'll be within the time constraints. So if you pardon the poor teaching here. So here it goes. Initial symptoms were typical of a bad flu, and I have some memory of being in bed with a bad headache and just not wanting to move. When my doctor saw me and noticed confusion and a tremor in my right hand, she sent me to casualty, where I was later discharged that same day following blood tests and a CAT scan, I think. I was told that I was working too hard and I had picked up a bad dose, and take a week off and a few paracetamol was what I needed. Little did I know then, that when I was sent home from the hospital to rest, that I would never return to school and would be forced into early retirement as a result of the encephalitis, which was now beginning to manifest itself in strange behaviours, general confusion, a continuously shaky right hand, like what I have at the moment. That's just my nerves here today. Mild. I used to do this regularly, and now I haven't spoken in front of a crowd for a long time. So anyway, mild hallucinations and chronic headache. And when my GP rang the following morning to inquire as to how I was, she was surprised to hear that I was back in my own bed. And she told Fiona to bring me straight back to the hospital, where I would remain for the next 3 weeks. My diagnosis, unlike the case with so many other encephalitis survivors, was confirmed relatively quickly by lumbar puncture and MRI scans. And to make a long story short, I was eventually discharged under the care of my wonderful consultant, as well as that of a consultant geriatrician. I don't think I was well enough at the time to question the reason for this, but I imagine it was fairly obvious to people around me. I was 54 and my life was changing dramatically. In my own mind, I was just happy to be getting out of hospital and was hoping to be back at work and play in a matter of weeks. When I read and hear other people's stories, I appreciate how lucky I was that I never was in a coma. I never on a ventilator, never had to relearn how to speak, walk or read again. But what became clear was that on adjusting to life outside of the hospital, I was left, initially at any rate, with a patchwork quilt of new challenges. These included short and long-term memory issues, fatigue, much lower powers of concentration, poor sense of direction, taste issues, sensory overload, being very emotional, as well as a free fall in self-confidence. Each one in its own way was preventing me from returning to life as I had known it. I had difficulty finding some words, especially in a noisy environment, and I recall being very conscious of closing my eyes quite a bit when talking to people and getting tired very quickly, especially when in company. My ability to interpret language at the time had been affected, and I was very slow to get subtleties or jokes or simple newspaper headlines I'd misread, misinterpret. So they were the source of confusion and frustration. Everything was being interpreted literally, and my processing speed had also been impacted. I appreciate now that I had become more irritable and at times argumentative, misconstruing remarks and situations on a regular basis. And with regard to good friends with whom I am still blessed, I had no great desire to meet with them. And when I did, I always found it extremely tiring. I know that for some time I became more comfortable not being with them, but rather in my own company and that of my little dog, in whose world I hadn't changed, but I had just been away for a few weeks. Publicly, I tried to pretend that I was better than I really was. I became very conscious of asking people to repeat themselves, and it was often easier just to nod and smile with them rather than to admit that I was having problems. I recall getting very emotional when discussing any difficulty which I was experiencing. Not talking about daily encephalitis-related issues, therefore very quickly became my default mode. People would tell me I was looking very well, and it was much easier for me to say I was doing fine and hoping to return to school soon. The reality was very different. For the first few months, Fiona was the only one who I felt had some understanding of what I was going through. It didn't take me long to appreciate that it just wasn't my world that had changed. But also the world of the people that I cared about. I know they made allowances for my difficulties, and at times this exacerbated the frustrations that I had. Sorry about this, it's just when you go back and you think about it. And I'm not normally an emotional type of guy. I am really, I suppose, but anyway, moving on. I didn't want to be treated any differently than I had been before the encephalitis. I became quite frustrated with myself for not being able to do the things or understand things that prior to the encephalitis had been part of who I was. I remember wanting to go to the shops on my own, while at the same time being very concerned that not only would I not be able to find or even remember what I was looking for, but that getting through the checkout would regularly be quite an ordeal. I was happier if I knew Fiona was nearby, but I really wanted to be able to do things for myself. My diary, which my consultant suggested I keep, referred to a determination I seemed to have, not always to take the doctor's advice, but to push myself to doing things that I wasn't ready for at the time. Watching golf or tennis on the telly was frustrating, and another daily reminder that if it was a challenge for me to work out who was in the lead and then to retain this basic information, progress was always going to be slow. During my initial recovery, I only enjoyed watching television on my own when I could rewind as I wished in order to recap on a sentence or something that I had missed. Films for the first year were a non-runner for me, as they involved far too many character interactions, and I wasn't good at matching faces and characters in my head. And to this day, despite such a good recovery, I still need to meet someone a few times before I can see them in my mind's eye. This probably explains why I could listen to and understand a TED Talk on a variety of interesting topics, but I couldn't follow a film or a simple soap opera on the television. I could follow animated films a bit easier, but I regularly found myself getting very emotional. Even watching cartoons like Tom and Jerry would just upset me, and they'd shoot each other and things like that. And you can see I'm a blubbering slob still, but so wind the clock back a few years and you can imagine the scene, yeah. So by now, the geriatrician had more or less given up on me, but not before getting me on the books of the National Rehabilitation Hospital in Dunleary. I recall feeling somewhat consoled by therapists who convinced me there that my display of raw emotions and a heightened empathy for things, even for cartoon characters, was seen as a good sign in terms of brain recovery. As a teacher and a child at heart, I had always enjoyed learning and performing magic tricks. It was one of the tools of the trade, just to keep the kids awake and bring them back into your class, into what you're trying to teach them about. And in school, there was always a captive and a willing audience who were not slow to boost the old ego and tell me how great I was. And I missed that. All of this now seemed light years away, and I know that during my initial recovery, I had lost any real sense of self-worth, and I missed being responsible for things. All of a sudden, I was no longer the go-to person when someone had a problem. Part of me needed to feel that I was of use to a significant number of people, both in family and work and among my friends. So one day in the National Rehabilitation Hospital, I remember being invited to attend a group session for other warriors who had an acquired brain injury. Apparently, according to my diary, I initially declined the invitation. I didn't think that mixing with other confused people would be of any help in my recovery. I just wanted to get out and get back to life. But eventually I was persuaded by my speech and language therapist that the group and myself would be a perfect match. I had now been out of hospital for 8 months. On attending the first of these, I noted that there was just one other member in the group who hadn't been in an accident or wasn't recovering from a stroke. By a strange and fortunate coincidence, he was a few months ahead of me on his own road to recovery from encephalitis. Meeting Tom was a milestone in my own recovery. Having someone who really understood my frustrations was invaluable. I would meet Tom regularly outside of the hospital setting, and his consoling words and reassurance, even though he was still obviously struggling to put the pieces of his own jigsaw back together, was an unquantifiable support to me. We quickly became the best of friends and still are to this day. And he's here at the back of the hall. Tom, give us a wave. And yeah, when he heard I was giving a talk, I said, I'm going to need someone to carry my bags and that kind of stuff. So he's here. So thank you, Tom. Once I felt I had recovered sufficiently and I had got my head around the realization that I would not be returning to school, I began to apply for 1 or 2 volunteering roles in the local community. Nothing too complicated. One involved just supporting young offenders, and the other one was working with the Blue Cross, which they work with cats and dogs. And following the interview process, I was told that the position had been filled. And I'm fairly certain I was turned down because of the encephalitis, the acquired brain injury that I had. I got the message, rightly or wrongly, that even volunteer societies in need of people giving of their free time didn't want to risk taking someone like me on. Feelings of self-worth and confidence were never as low as they were then. I had been receiving support from the Encephalitis Society and could see on their website that they were regularly looking for volunteers. It took some time, however, before I felt that I could possibly have something to offer, and it was months before I felt confident enough to apply. I had been attending Headway in Dublin for about a year, and I felt great empathy for those whose lives had changed far more drastically than mine. I really wanted to give something back, and especially to anyone whose struggles reminded me of the difficulties which I had wrestled with for the first 2 years. It was the personal experience of having my own unofficial support volunteer in the shape of Tom, whose journey had been so similar to mine, which I guess was the main impetus for me in contacting Laura in the office. A decision I have not regretted since. What a wonderful family of understanding, caring and committed people. The support and encouragement which has come my way has been nothing but extraordinary. The training I received before I could wear my volunteer hat took me a few months to complete as I spread it out by doing it at a pace at which I was comfortable at the time. I found the programme to be incredibly well structured and of the highest quality, and I learned so much more about encephalitis during those few weeks than I ever imagined I could or would. I'm one of 2 support volunteers in Ireland, the other being the wonderful Hannah. And for the past 2 years, our support has primarily been through Zoom meetings, and we're all looking forward to the day when we can meet up every now and then for a coffee and some regular face-to-face support, as well as the supportive, invaluable Zoom sessions which are held on a monthly basis. We are joined each month by Maria, who's the wonderful support volunteer up in the north, and Laura is always there too to advise us and remind us of the various supports available through the society. We have about 12 in the group who regularly join for support for either themselves, their children or their partners. And there are so many different types of supports, or volunteers. As I said, I'm a support volunteer, but there's the research volunteers, IT, awareness, fundraising, and there's a lot of information about volunteering with the Society available on the website. So if anyone is even remotely interested, you're only a few clicks away from becoming part of a very welcoming and rewarding team. I cannot praise head office strongly enough. They certainly make each one of us feel that we are significant cogs in the wheel of success of such a wonderful, much needed and much appreciated society. So thank you very much. So hopefully there's no questions. Unfortunately, there are.
Sorry, guys, my microphone. Is it on?
You can't ask the questions, so sorry.
We have them, but you can't have them yet.
Okay.
Sorry, Andy. Thank you so much. Sorry about that slight delay. John, I can't thank you enough for that incredible talk and for all your fantastic work with the Society. I have to say, when I asked Laura how long you'd been volunteering with us, I couldn't actually believe it's only been a year, because it feels like so much longer in the absolute best way. Anyway, I don't want to waffle on, because we do have lots of questions and comments from the audience. So one comment I will start with from our online delegates. A lot of what you were saying, I'm seeing in myself. Keep going, no problem with being emotional. Big smiley face. And now I'll follow up the statement with a question. Do you still struggle with noise and concentration in crowded scenes? For me, I still struggle with this since I had it at 7 years of age.
Yes, but certainly not to the extent that I did, in the initial year or two, when I couldn't go into a coffee shop or go out for a meal, or I remember queuing up and Fiona, my wife, found a table somewhere, and I said, I'll get the coffee and the scone or whatever. And when I went up, just the words wouldn't come out. And normally I'd be sociable enough and I'd be talking to the person behind me, but all I was doing was rehearsing in my head, a cup of coffee, a glass of Coke and a scone, and it just wouldn't come out, and it didn't, and I was, breaking out in a sweat, and I remember going back to the finding Fiona and just sitting down and saying, Fiona, we have to go, whereas that's gone. I can now, I'm comfortable with noise. I won't be going night clubbing or anything like that, but those days are over too, thank God. But no, that has certainly improved very noticeably. Yeah.
Thank you so much, John. Do we have any questions from the room? We can go to a digital question. If not, that's no. Oh, here we go. The technology plays ball. I have a comment from Hannah, who's been diligently watching back home, who's just said, "Well done, John," and a lot of exclamation marks.
Thank you. Thanks, Hannah. Your check is in the post.
So another question from our online audience. Can you tell me how you juggle your life with your volunteering? It sounds so brilliant, but I'm a bit scared I'd be overwhelmed and would be useless.
There's not much juggling to do. I would say, thankfully, I'm a very busy person still, although life has changed. I have lots of interests and things that I can do and enjoy doing. The volunteering that I do doesn't take that much time, and it's very much up to each volunteer. Some will be more comfortable doing more. I find it very easy to fit it into a relatively busy schedule that I have, and it doesn't impose at all. It's and I'm always aware that if I do touch base with somebody, who reminds me of what I was like, or is going through that kind of crisis, that it's well worth 10 or 15 minutes of my time or half an hour to touch base with them and reassure them that while they mightn't realise it at the time, but that things do improve. And I remember that, even though Tom was only 6 months ahead of me, and meeting Tom, and he said, I said, Tom, I can't even, the headlines on the newspaper, and I can read, somebody could hand me something fairly complicated and I could read it, but I wouldn't remember, and I could start researching as soon as I was getting better. I wanted to know how did this brain work, and particularly the fact that I could no longer memorize a piece of music, which prior to the encephalitis was, I could never play football, but music was my thing, and if I heard a melody, I could, catch it and mess around with it and quite quickly, but I can't do that anymore. That's just, and if that's one of the things, that it could be an awful lot worse. So here I am going off the question. That's why I met a past pupil recently, and they said, we never knew what, in your classes, you could start talking about a maths equation and we could end up in a cave in Cambodia or somewhere. So I can't even remember what the question was, no, Sarah. But
well, then let me, sorry.
But you know, it was about the time for the volunteering. Yeah, I have it now. It's no problem. And it's very much up to each individual, you know. If you've only got an hour a month or 2 hours a month, it's still valuable if you can. I certainly feel it, and talking to the fabulous group of volunteers who are here, everybody feels that it's well worth it. You know, it's worth any support that we can give to the people who are coming behind us. It has to be good, you know.
Thanks, John. Your check's in the post too. I've got so many loving messages here from other volunteers. Paula Moulton says, "You did extremely well, John. Well done." All in capital letters.
Thanks, Paul.
I have another comment from another online joiner, Debbie, who says, "All of what you've encountered are exactly the same as what I had back in 1999, and I still suffer with these frustrating issues, especially my emotions."
Right, there you go.
And I think we've got time for one last question from the digital. Oh no, we've got in-person questions. If Laura wants to run. So, oh, you've got one there. Okay, go.
I just wanted to say, as previously been a teacher myself, I really appreciate this link in. I actually was nodding all the way through there, and I think it's just amazing to feel less alone in the sort of life experiences we've had. And I really appreciate the fact that I feel somebody understands what we've been through now. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're doing another room question for the online joiners because I've been greedy. I have been shoving in a lot of extras.
So nice. They're exactly the same as what I've gone through. Exactly the same. Now, in your memory, it's just like you're talking about me there.
Okay. Yeah.
Lovely.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, John.
That's it. I'm off the hook. Yeah.
You're off the hook now.
Thank you.